because the police are afraid. And I have senior contacts in the police who tell me that their biggest fear is Muslims kicking off. So that mustn't be allowed to happen. And then the other fear is that a lot of us now have started refusing to go along with the multiculturalism has worked out absolutely brilliantly. And
what is the single biggest fear of a senior police officer in the United Kingdom today? Is it the rise of sophisticated organised crime? The ever-present threat of terrorism? The tragic epidemic of knife crime on our streets? According to a shocking leaked discussion among the very people in charge of our nation's law enforcement, it's none of those things. Their biggest fear, in their own words, is Muslims kicking off. You heard that correctly. A candid, behind-closed-doors conversation among senior police officers has been brought into the light, and it reveals a disturbing truth about the state of modern policing in Britain. The core principle of law enforcement is no longer about upholding the law without fear or favour. Instead, it's about managing potential backlash. The leak confirms what many have suspected for years. Officers openly admit that they tread lightly around certain issues specifically to avoid what they call community backlash. This isn't a rookie constable on the beat being cautious, this is command-level strategy. The fear of unrest, the fear of protests, the fear of being labelled is now actively shaping law enforcement decisions from the top down.
We are in the middle of an epidemic of moral cowardice, I'm afraid, in our country. We are appeasing some of the worst people because the police are afraid. And I have senior contacts in the police who tell me that their biggest fear is Muslims kicking off. So that mustn't be allowed to happen. And then the other fear is that a lot of us now have started refusing to go along with the multiculturalism has worked out absolutely brilliantly. And they are now afraid of people pointing that out. But this is absolutely outrageous. And we've got this guy, Ayub Khan, an independent member of parliament who has celebrated this Israeli team not being allowed to come to Aston Villa. And he has basically delivered a load of propaganda and misinformation. He said that this particular team was involved in scuffles in Amsterdam, in attacks. The actual fact of what happened in Amsterdam, which is documented by a court, is hundreds of Muslims in Amsterdam ambushed and set out on what was called a Jew hunt, all right? And this was not just football fans, this was any Jew they could find. They threw them into canals, they jumped out of canals. There was immense violence. So what we're seeing, as I said, is the police are appeasing these people. We've got an Islamic preacher, Astar Rashid. When the Tel Aviv team, if they come to Birmingham, we will not show them mercy. That is incitement, right? Yeah. You have any other member of any other community saying that, and that they would be done for incitement, but it's all, let's consult with community leaders. Let's do a community impact assessment. We don't want the police to do a community impact assessment for one protected characteristic. This is the United Kingdom. The police are supposed to be policing for every single one of us.
Let's first dissect the central admission. The fear of Muslims kicking off. This phrase, while crude, is incredibly revealing. It speaks to a perception within police leadership that the response from one specific community is a greater operational risk than the crime itself. Think about the implications of that. It means that when a sensitive case arises, the first question in the minds of those in charge might not be, what does the law say? Or, what does the evidence show? But rather, what will the reaction be if we act? This is the very definition of a two-tiered system of justice. It creates a situation where the law is not a universal constant, but a variable applied differently depending on the identity of those involved. The leaked discussion mentions treading lightly to avoid community backlash. What does this treading lightly look like in practice? It could mean a delay in making arrests for crimes that are perceived as being religiously or culturally sensitive. We've seen cases of grooming gangs where authorities were hesitant to speak plainly about the shared background of the perpetrators for fear of being accused of racism or Islamophobia. This hesitation, this treading lightly, allowed monsters to prey on vulnerable children for years longer than they should have. It could mean policing protests differently. We see some protests where roads are blocked and statues are torn down, met with a passive hands-off approach. Yet, we see other gatherings, like those of concerned parents or anti-lockdown protesters, met with swift and decisive force. The calculation is clear: which group is more likely to kick off and cause a bigger headache for the police and their political masters. It could even mean the effective enforcement of the de facto blasphemy law on British streets. In a free society, the right to offend, criticise, or even mock religion is a cornerstone of free expression. Yet, when incidents occur, a controversial cartoon, a satirical film, a protester holding a sign, the police response is often focused not on protecting the person's right to free speech, but on managing the anger of those who are offended. They might advise the person to leave for their own safety, or even arrest them for breaching the peace, effectively punishing the victim to placate the mob. This isn't policing. This is capitulation. This brings us to the second, and perhaps most corrosive consequence. Fear of unrest is now shaping law enforcement decisions. The police force is supposed to be a shield, protecting the public from lawbreakers. But this leak suggests it is transforming into a buffer, a conflict management agency whose primary goal is to absorb and de-escalate tension. When fear is the primary motivator, every decision becomes a risk assessment based on public relations, not public safety. Imagine a scenario. A crime is committed. The evidence is clear, the suspect is identified. But the suspect belongs to a group that is perceived as being volatile. The senior officer in charge now faces a choice. Option A is to enforce the law, make the arrest, follow the evidence, and let the justice system run its course. This upholds the principle of equality under the law, but risks protests, accusations of institutional bias in the media, and immense political pressure. Option B is to appease, delay the investigation, issue a vague statement, engage in community outreach, and hope the situation diffuses on its own. This avoids immediate conflict, but sends a clear message that the law is negotiable. It tells one group that their anger grants them leverage over the justice system, and it tells everyone else that the protection they receive from the police is conditional. Which option do you think is increasingly being chosen? The leak gives us the answer. This shift from justice to appeasement is a poison that seeps into every level of policing. It demoralizes the good officers on the ground who simply want to do their job. They see a clear crime, they want to act, but they are held back by orders from above. They are told to stand down, to observe, to not provoke. They are being asked to manage a situation, not to resolve it. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. The more the police appease in the face of threats and intimidation, the more they signal that threats and intimidation are effective tactics. This, in turn, encourages more of the same, requiring even greater appeasement in the future. It's a downward spiral from which it is very difficult to recover. So we arrive at the heart of the matter. The final, damning statement from our initial analysis. Britain's policing priorities have shifted from justice to appeasement. The social contract we have with the police is simple. We, the public, grant them power and authority. In return, they agree to enforce the laws of the land impartially, protecting the innocent and pursuing the guilty, regardless of who they are. This leaked discussion suggests that this contract is being quietly rewritten. The police are now being forced to serve two masters, the law, and the perceived threat of social unrest. And when those two masters are in conflict, it appears the fear of unrest is winning. This is a betrayal of the fundamental promise of a liberal democracy. The law is meant to be a shield for everyone, especially the weak against the strong. But if a group can become too strong or too loud to be policed effectively, then the law loses all meaning. It becomes a tool used against the compliant, while the non-compliant carve out their own zones of exception. When the police are more afraid of offending than they are of enforcing the law, the country is no longer being policed. It is being managed through fear. We are not being protected, we are being handled. Our society is not being governed by a single set of rules. It is being partitioned by fear. This is not a criticism of the individual officer on the beat. It is a criticism of a leadership that has lost its nerve. It is a criticism of a political class that has outsourced its responsibility for social cohesion to the police, asking them to perform an impossible balancing act. The revelations from this leak should be a wake-up call for every single person in this country who believes in fairness, equality, and the rule of law. This isn't about one community or another. This is about the principle that no one, absolutely no one, should be above the law, and no one should be beneath its protection. We must demand a return to policing without fear or favour. We must empower our police to enforce the law, not to manage our feelings. We must make it clear that the only thing anyone in this country should be afraid of is the consequence of breaking the law, not the fury of a mob. Because a nation managed by fear is a nation on the path to losing its freedom. What are your thoughts on this? Is this a pragmatic approach by the police in a complex, multicultural society? Or is it a dangerous dereliction of duty that threatens the very foundation of British justice? Let me know your opinion in the comments section below. If you found this analysis valuable, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who needs to hear this message. Thank you for watching.